This is a short presentation on climate change education into the future. What are the implications for climate change education and research? I will be drawing on Hartman-Rose's theory of resonance and resonance praxis building, resilience in the face of climate change catastrophes and challenges, and Dissenter's work on epistemologies of the South and the ending of the abyssal line. Okay, I think I'm preaching to the converted here in the sense that we all know what are the challenges facing the environment, ecology, and society in the 21st century. These are scenes from 2020 alone. The orange skies over Los Angeles and California, the wildfires that have caused that, drought, especially in southern Africa and across the world, Cyclone Ampad, hurtling towards Bangladesh, India, and Sri Lanka. And we live in a world where these challenges and weather disturbances are becoming more frequent because of climate change. And we need to ask how exactly are we to respond to these issues and problems as educators. This comes back to Rhodes' theory of dynamic stabilization. And he says that one very curious but consistent fact about late modern life is that almost irrespective of people's values, statuses, and moral commitments, subjects feel notoriously short on time and tirelessly pressed to hurry. I think all of us can attest to the fact that life is speeding up or that there's never enough time. Everyone feels rushed. No matter how fast they run, they close the day as subjects of guilt. They almost never succeed in working off their to-do list. Thus, even and especially if they have enough money and wealth, they are indebted temporally. So there is a kind of depth in time, and we need more time more than anything else, it seems. Rosa then goes on to say that a society is modern when it operates in a mode of dynamic stabilization, when it systematically requires growth, innovation, and acceleration for its structural reproduction, and in order to maintain its socio-economic and institutional status quo. And this pace of acceleration and this pace of modernity is also what has caused the rift between our natural world and society. And the circle of acceleration between technology, social change, and the corresponding acceleration of the pace of life has become a self-propelling mechanism. And it's almost as if it cannot be stopped. So, in the spate of all this, in the face of all this, individuals feel more and more alienated and more alone. And we are searching for axes of resonance. And yet in our search for resonance, we seem to be destroying more and more of the world, though we try to gain more and more of it. There's always that lie in advertising that you just need this thing or that thing to complete yourself. And it seems that modern life is all about acquiring things. And so there's a widespread and growing sense across the world that we do not so much gain and dispose of the world and destroy it and endanger it. And this sense is most vivid in environmental concerns than in the mode of dynamic stabilization. Through incessant growth and acceleration, we damage and destroy, impoverish and reduce, pollute and poison our natural resources. So there's this search for resonance, this search for meaning in human life that is as old as time. But the sociological theory of resonance has its roots in critical theory. Rousseau experienced it when he disputed the gains made through progress and interpreted them as genuine loss in the quality of all being in the world. Karl Marx identified it as a fivefold process of alienation from work, from the products of work, from nature, from our fellow human beings, and in the end from ourselves, and took it as a starting point of his philosophy. And that later on inspired the diagnosis of alienation and the corresponding forms of reification by O'Donnell, Fromm, Marcuse, as well as George Lucas. Marcuse spoke about the one-dimensional man, in that human life is becoming more and more one-dimensional. Nietzsche also mentioned it and said that human beings are becoming domesticated dogs, conforming and just following what is the normal status quo. And more recently by Axel Honneth and feminist scholars like Rahil Jaigi. And thus we see the world becomes mute. We always want the world to speak to us. That's why we use smartphones and television screens, and we want the world to respond. But it seems the more and more we gain, or the more and more we destroy, the more alienated we are. And in all of these conceptions, there looms the shadow of a world turned shallow and silent, mute and deaf through our very attempt to control and commodify it. Alienation has come to serve as the keyword for a world that has become cold and grey, harsh and non-responding, experienced by a subject that inwardly feels deaf, mute and cold and empty too. Donna Haraway said it the best when she said, "Our machines have become lively, but we have become inert. Our screens and television screens flicker with life while we sit almost in a state of vegetation in front of them." It's represented in artworks. This is The Screen by Munch, where even if you're in the midst of a crowd, you can still feel very alienated and alone. So resonance is a response then to alienation. It's defined as alienation's other. And this is probably a way where we can get back in touch with the natural world or our social world. And first it is by affection, in the sense that we have an experience where we truly touched or moved. And I'm sure many of us can recall a time where we were extremely moved by an event, felt resonant. It can be in a natural setting, can be by the sea, it can be with family and friends, sharing a glass of wine. It can be even a movie, whatever it was, where you really felt resonant, where you really felt alive, and that something is responding to you, and that the world is speaking to you. Second, by emotion, as the experience of responsiveness. So here also that you are responding and the world is responding back. And so that's why you resonate like a string. And it's full of promise, and it's a beautiful melody. And third, resonance is described by its transformative quality, in that once you've experienced the feeling of resonance, you are transformed. Be it that it was a nature experience and you're moved to a conservation ethic, or moved to protect it even more, or in education, in a classroom with your students, and where you're moved by these young minds that you serve so well, and fought by an intrinsic moment of elusiveness. Even though resonance occurs, it can never really be grasped, and you can't really plan for it in a way. It just comes upon the participants in an activity or in a place. I guess you can set up prerequisites for it, or a good setting for it, but at the end of the day it remains extremely elusive, and has this ethereal quality. But once it occurs, you know it has occurred. So Rosa talks about 3 different axes of resonance, and we looked at the first one, which is the vertical axis, and that could be nature. It also is religion. Those are things that are deep in the world, and we try to resonate with it, and it's there whether we experience it or not. Then there's the diagonal axis of resonance, which what education falls under, and here it occurs in a setting, which is the educational setting. And now I will explain a little further on that triangle of resonance. So resonance can occur in an educational setting, as much as resonance cannot occur. But in my study, I'm attempting to show that resonance can be built in pedagogy, and it can be cultivated and co-created by teachers and learners in places. My study deals with how to use fieldwork as a resonance builder, as in getting learners and teachers into a natural setting and then allowing that setting to create resonance, a feeling of resonance between all the participants. And it's very important because here the teacher tries to reach the student, conveys the excitement, and co-engages in the fieldwork with the learner in places. A very un-PC word here, allow themselves to be touched. Yes, but you are being touched from within. Something stirs within your soul, something stirs within you when you are in that feeling of resonance. And there's not a kind of barrier between you and the learners. The learners also can connect to the social materiality of the place and potentially feel accepted. Learners, when they feel accepted, can access resonance in the classroom so much better than when they feel that they're not. It is a very palpable thing. You create it as an educator, and in any setting you'll feel it, whether you're welcome or not. I mean, most of the time we speak not only with language but with body language and with feelings, and this is the basis of resonance as well. And when you feel accepted and you can feel free, then you're also open, and that leads to more resonant activities. And the place is also very important. The social materiality of places is experienced by learners and educators as a field of meaningful possibility and challenges involving education, learning, and development. So this triangle of resonance, as I call it, can be adapted to resonance building. And resonance building is very important, especially in the field of climate change education, because it's only when the student feels resonant and feels that they are part of the landscape and part of the community and part of the earth that they can feel that they are called to protect it and called to be more ecologically literate and find solutions to problems that is there in the environment. So I believe that resonance is a vital part of climate change education. We see it happening so much. We see it happening so much in the world where students feel disconnected. In the north and in the south, students get apathetic when faced with the onslaught of environmental issues. In Europe, students were committing suicide because of environmental problems or because they felt that life was so bleak. There was a movie called Avatar recently, and people felt that Avatar was a much more beautiful world than the world we got, and they were very upset by this. And it shows the disconnect of how one misplaces what's right in front of us, the natural world which is our inheritance, how we can so easily dismiss it for something that we see on a flat screen. So being a part of the environment, resonating with it, being a part of your society, your community, resonating with it, that is a much more powerful impetus to climate change education than the alienated, institutionalized form of education that we have. And especially now, during coronavirus, where there is a sense that we have to overcome an invisible enemy. Also in a sense that the world has slowed down, but it hasn't really slowed down. It's slowed down for some, but the acceleration is still there, waiting to come back in. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the new world that we can imagine? What is the world we can imagine where we all can resonate with each other, resonate with a common plan, and with a common goal of learning to love the environment? So DeSantos talks about the end of the cognitive empire, and what we're seeing in the South is that there's a huge divide between the North and the South in research, in resources, um, in relating to each other. And this calls for a 12th thesis. We must change the world while constantly reinterpreting it, as much as change itself. And the reinterpretation of the world is a collective endeavor. First, we don't need alternatives, we need rather an alternative thinking of alternatives. And second, the constant reinterpretation of the world can only be possible in the context of struggle, and therefore cannot be conducted as a separate task disengaged from the struggle. Third, as much as the struggle mobilizes multiple kinds of knowledge, reinterpretation cannot be provided by any single body of knowledge. Fourth, given the centrality of social struggles against domination, if by an absurd hypothesis the oppressed social groups ceased to struggle against oppression, either because they didn't feel the need or considered themselves utterly deprived of the conditions necessary for struggle, there would be no room for epistemologies of the South. So, what we need is a revolution from the South, and the South's way of being and living in the world needs to be appreciated, needs to be to resonate with our collective knowledge. 6. Since we constantly reinterpret the world while changing it as collective work, there is no room for philosophers conceived as vanguard intellectuals. Rather, the epistemologies of the South call for rearguard intellectuals that contribute with their knowledge to strengthening the social struggles against domination and oppression. And this is the work of dissenters. Retrieving the suppressed, silenced, and marginalized knowledges requires engaging what is being called a sociology of absences. What is not there? A procedure showed that, given the resilience of the abyssal lines, many practices, knowledges, agents existing on the other side of the abyssal line are in fact actively produced as non-existent by the dominant ways of knowing on this side, and all the more so when they engage in resistance against abyssal exclusions caused by capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy. There are three layers of problems or challenges that we need to face in the South as we try to reclaim those absences and overcome the abyssal line. And these three layers call for methodological critique and innovation, and new solutions and new answers. And this is really what we need to do moving forward with climate change education, is finding new solutions and answers for our own context. But the first layer of problems we find is the problem of objectivity. How is objectivity to be distinguished from neutrality? A distinction at the core of epistemologies of the South. Then there's the problem of the role of science in the ecologies of knowledge. Even if modern science is not the only kind of valid knowledge, it is certainly recognized as one of the most important ones. So how is scientific knowledge to be articulated with non-scientific knowledge in the ecologies of knowledge? Then there's the problem of experience. Where is the territory where practical relations of struggle are planned, opportunities calculated, risks measured, and the pros and cons weighed? And then there's the problem of the warming up of reason, inspired by Ernest Bloch. Warm reason is the reason that lives comfortably with emotions, affections, and feelings without surrendering its reasonableness. In the context of a struggle, particularly of struggles that involve personal risks, reason must be warmed up in a very specific way. How can we do that? Still in the first layer of problems is the problem of authorship. Most knowledges that emerge from social struggles are collective or operate as such. Rather than having authors, there are many authors. Nonetheless, super authors frequently emerge in the struggles. How does one understand this? And especially in the South, there's a problem of orality and writing. Since most of the knowledge present in the colleges of knowledge circulate orally, some have no written version. So how can knowledges in such evanescent and even imperceptible fluxes be validated? The second layer of problem concerns theoretical or methodological reconstructions. And here we are trying to really decide how to decolonize knowledge as well as the methodologies by which it's produced. Does this entail developing hybrid concepts or theories along the lines of decolonized places in which the mix of knowledges, cultures, and subjectivities and practices subvert the abyssal line that grounds the epistemologies of the North? Or since colonialism is co-creation, decolonizing entails decolonizing the knowledge of the colonized as much as the knowledge of the colonizer? We need to ask ourselves how to develop methodologies that are consonant with the epistemology of the South, and by non-extractivist methodologies. Abyssal modern social sciences relies on methodologies that extract information from research objects, very much the same way as mining industries extract minerals and oil from nature. The epistemologies of the South, on the contrary, rely on knowing with rather than knowing about, and that is by relying on the co-creation of knowledge among cognitive subjects, and must offer some guidelines as to the methodologies that can carry out such tasks successfully. What are the contexts of the mixes of scientific and artisanal knowledges in ecologies of knowledge? Different knowledges relate differently to the struggles against capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy. The integration in ecologies of knowledge raises different issues. And how can we bring that? Things like traditional knowledge, traditional making and crafts. How can we bring that to really be a part of how we are moving forward in resonating and relating with the world? And we need to ask ourselves, what does it entail to be a post-abyssal researcher? The positionality of different knowing subjects, outsiders and insiders, is crucial to understanding how much unlearning and unthinking is involved in the construction of epistemology. As cognitive processes are embedded in the context of struggle and resistance, the risks involved must be also considered, as well as the existing wounds and the healing processes. How to demo-monumentalize written knowledge and promote authorship? Written knowledge in general and scientific knowledge in particular is monumental knowledge. Being monumental, it's fairly inadequate to engage in a dialogue or conversation with other knowledges, an objective that underlies the whole idea of the epistemology of the South, hence the methodological task of demonumentalizing. And then there's the problem of archive. How is it possible to retrieve the past experience and memories of agencies and realities that are subjected to abyssal exclusion by Western-centric abyssal thinking? Through the sociology of absences and the sociology of emergences, the epistemologies of the South open up the archive of the present. But what about the archive of the past, without which no archive of the future is possible? And here in the third layer, we find progressive transformative practices that hopefully will have some way of moving forward. There's the problem of intercultural translation, how to articulate and entertain a conversation among different knowledges that in some instances are anchored in different cultures. There's the problem of popular education, how to develop and proliferate and sustain contexts for collaborative self-learning, through which the ecologies of knowledge are practiced in light of commonly agreed upon transformative practices. And then there's the problem of decolonizing the university, how to refound the university on the basis of the primacy of the principle and of cognitive justice. And then how to link the popular education at the university to ecologies of knowledge and an artisanship of practices. How to recognize knowledge as born or present in social struggles while these are being fought and at once ended, irrespective of their outcomes. So I would like to thank you for joining me on this short tour of resonance and epistemologies of the South. These are my references, mainly drew from the work of Hartmut Rosa, Resonance, a sociology of our relationship to the world, and D'Souza Santos' The End of the Cognitive Empire, where he etches out what is needed to cross the abyssal line and to reclaim our space at the table, the coming of age of the epistemologies of the South. So there is a lot of work to be done, a lot of deep methodological and theoretical work to be done as well as practical work. And it is a challenge, but it's a good challenge, I believe, and it's a challenge that can be met. And once we find that zone where we can resonate more deeply with the world, then perhaps we can find that we are transformed. And being transformed, then maybe, perhaps, we can transform our surroundings and the world. Thank you.